Charlie's Tale, written by Gregory Husby and read by Gregory Husby. Illustrations by Jillian Husby. Charlie! Kitty, kitty, kitty! His head lifted from the quilt and his ears popped straight up. Before the fog of sleep had lifted, all four of Charlie's paws hit the ground running. As he rounded the hall corner and entered the kitchen, he could see Jenny squatting down, ever so carefully pouring milk into the saucer on the floor. Charlie could feel his little motor come to life in his throat. As he savored with contentment each lap of cow's milk, Charlie's purr became more and more audible. By his own recollection, Charlie figured he had had 7 catnaps today. 3 on Jenny's bed, 2 under her bed, 1 in front of the windowsill, and 1 on the forbidden kitchen counter while watching the fish tank. Things had become quite quiet around the house since his Jenny had started back to school. All he seemed to do nowadays was sleep, but feeling well rested, Charlie was anxious to see Mimi and Toby out on the fence later that evening. Once he had tucked Jenny into bed, Charlie would give himself a quick bath, scout about for any foolish mice, and then meet up with his friends under the moonlight. After putting the pitcher of milk back into the refrigerator, Jenny bent down to pet the love of her life, Charlie. She could hear the little engine running in his throat. Charlie lifted his head to look at her, his purr not skipping a beat. Jenny giggled to see that his chin was covered with the white milk. She too missed Charlie now that she had started back to school. But her days were so busy with schoolwork, friends, and such. It was just a few years ago. Jenny was playing in the backyard of her home. She heard a dog and a cat fighting in the yard across the way. As she ran towards the sounds of the barking and hissing, she came upon a small dog and an even smaller cat. Both were now squared off in a brief but calculated stare-down, readying for round 2. With her arms flailing, Jenny was upon them both in an instant. "No, no, no!" she yelled. The little scruffy-looking Pomeranian dog bolted towards its owner's house, tail between its legs, yapping continually all the way until disappearing through the doggy door. Jenny looked down to see a small young tabby kitten cowering to the ground. His little tail was bottle-brushed, and his eyes were full of fear. Instantly Jenny could see that something was terribly wrong. The soft orange fur was matted with crimson red in the middle of the kitten's tail. It had been bitten and was obviously broke, now with a noticeable bend near the tip. Jenny picked the kitten up and held it to her chest. Out of nowhere, Jenny's mother was beside her. She had heard all the noise and ran from her back door to find her daughter holding the injured kitten. At that same moment, from the back door into which the canine culprit had retreated, out came the Pomeranian's burly owner. He explained that recently there had been 2 young stray kittens hanging around his yard, eating scraps out of his pooch's bowl at night. He didn't know where they had come from, but was determined to catch them and take them to the pound. It was more than apparent to both Jenny and her mother that this man didn't like cats at all. When the dog owner reached forward to retrieve the stray, Jenny pulled back and turned away, clutching the kitten to her chest. Jenny pled and pled with her mother, tears streaming down her face, to keep the injured kitten. She promised to take care of it and love it forever. Nothing had ever been so important to Jenny in all of her life as was now the welfare of this poor little injured cat. Recognizing the consequences of refusal, her mother wholeheartedly agreed, and a kitten was saved that day. Jenny named her new cat Charlie. After a few weeks of Jenny's nursing him back to health had passed, Charlie's tail healed and the fur began to return. Unfortunately, the bone had been damaged beyond repair, and it left it permanently bent sideways. Crooked tail or not, Jenny loved him more and more each day. Every night since, without exception, before going to bed, she has made sure her Charlie has had a saucer of milk. Teeth brushed, socks off, pajamas on and in bed, Jenny knows that any second her Charlie will jump up, curl around in her arm, and lay his head on her chest. Every night is the same, and as her eyes close and she drifts into slumber, Jenny's hand softly brushes back the long whiskers on the cheek of her Charlie. He could hear her heartbeat and feel her chest expand and contract. The touch of Jenny's fingers was Charlie's security blanket. So much time had passed since she had saved his life in the Pomeranian's yard that day. He had forgotten more than he still remembered. Charlie could not recall how he had ended up in that yard, or where he had come from. To Charlie, Jenny was his mother. The bond between them was stronger than any force in the universe. Now, as Jenny's breathing slowed and silence blanketed the house, Charlie began to think of his friends, Mimi and Toby. Toby was his best friend, a jet-black cat with a curiosity streak a mile long. Toby was forever getting into mischief. One night long ago, while Charlie was sitting on the fence alone in the moonlight, up jumped Toby. Charlie could tell that this cat had been around the block a few times. His ears were scarred from fighting, and he was thin as a rail. Toby, most of all, wouldn't let anyone pet him. Whoever Toby's family is, Charlie thought, they sure don't feed him enough. But Charlie never questioned Toby about his owner or where he lived. Charlie figured Toby would tell him if he wanted him to know. The one thing Charlie liked about Toby was that he never made fun of his tail. To a cat, its tail is a sign of distinction. In Charlie's case, having a crooked tail, in his mind, made him less attractive. Charlie was always kind of embarrassed about his tail, but not around Toby. From that first night on, they were pals, and as nocturnal friends, were inseparable. Each evening after Jenny had fallen asleep, Charlie would head out the cat door, across the grass, and jump up to the fence. And every night, Toby would be waiting there for him. They would climb the trees and look at the stars, or chase butterflies across the meadow. Sometimes they would both walk back and forth on the fence around the Pomeranian's house. They would laugh as the little furry yapper would go bananas, jumping up and down trying to get them both. Their fun was usually short-lived when the back door would open and out would storm the burly owner, yelling some not-so-kind words at them. Both would scatter from the fence and venture elsewhere. Toward the evening's end, just prior to sunrise, both Charlie and Toby would make their way to Charlie's cat door. When they had first met long ago, Toby had told Charlie that he never gets milk. In fact, prior to meeting Charlie, Toby had never tasted milk. So every evening from then on, when Jenny gave Charlie his milk at night, he would leave half of it in the saucer for his friend. While Toby waited outside, Charlie would make sure the coast was clear inside the house. Toby would then sneak into the kitchen through the cat door and enjoy the remaining fresh milk. Charlie always felt good about that. It was a month or so ago when Charlie met his other friend, Mimi. The large yellow moving van had pulled up next door to Jenny's house. All day, in and out, furnishings were moved to and from. Jenny's new neighbors had moved in. The next night, Charlie and Toby were on the fence meowing at the stars when a third cat appeared. When Charlie saw her, he almost lost his balance. There in front of both of them stood the most beautiful feline Charlie had ever seen. White and black in color, with fur that shimmered in softness, incredibly long-whiskered, with a perfectly tied pink bow around her neck. She took his breath away. "Hi, boys. My name is Mimi. What's yours?" Toby answered her first, but when it came time for Charlie to talk, he had a frog in his throat. Underneath his orange fur, Charlie's face had blushed red. "I'm Charlie," he finally forced out. From that day on, where there had been 2 friends before, there were now 3. Jenny was asleep now. Charlie stood up on the bedspread and looked at her. The house was warm and completely silent. Charlie knew she would be asleep there all night, and it made him happy. As Charlie sat at the end of the bed cleaning his paws, he began to think about Mimi. Charlie had a crush on her. She was so smart and pretty, but what could she ever see in an orange bent-tailed cat like me? Charlie thought. The thud of his paws hitting the carpet, the clicking of his nails across the cold kitchen floor, and the tiny squeak of the cat door gate, Charlie exited into the night. The cool dew on his paws sharpened his senses. As he looked up the fence to gauge his jump, Charlie could see that the sky was perfectly clear and a half-moon shined brightly. He was anxious to see his friends. His jump was flawless. The 4-inch fence top provided more than enough room for Charlie to maneuver swiftly down his backyard expressway. He could hear the Pomeranian yapping up ahead with rapidity. As Charlie approached, he could see Toby running across the Pomeranian's yard at full speed with the dog chasing right behind. Toby launched from the ground, his claws sunk into the old oak wood fence that stood well over 5 feet tall. Charlie could hear Toby gasp for air as the skinny jet-black cat pulled himself up, over, and next to Charlie on the fence top. The Pomeranian continued relentlessly to bark and bounce up and down like a jack-in-the-box on the grass below. Then, to both Charlie's and Toby's delight, the Pomeranian's owner opened the back door and yelled, "Dinner time!" With that, the noisy canine abandoned its post and disappeared through the doggy door. "That was a close one," Toby said, still panting hard. Charlie could see why Toby had been on the Pomeranian's turf. In the center of the yard, the burly Pomeranian owner had years ago dug out the earthen ground and installed a storm shelter. Living in the Midwest, tornadoes are common, and shelters such as these provide a family with a safe place to stay until the twister passes. But tonight the weather was clear and calm. Toby told Charlie that earlier in the day he had seen the burly owner moving a few boxes into the shelter. Evidently, the owner forgot to close the door when he had finished. When Charlie had arrived, Toby had been maneuvering his way towards the open shelter door, but was detected and deterred by the territorial canine. "Come on, Charlie, let's go check it out. We can do it," Toby begged. His curiosity was getting the best of him. Charlie had no intention or desire to hop down into that Pomeranian's yard. Not a day of his feline life had gone by that he had not remembered how his tail had gotten bent. He feared that mean dog, and he could still hear in his head the burly owner's words that he was determined to catch them and take them to the pound. There was no way Charlie was going to go into that yard. Meow. Both Charlie's and Toby's heads turned instantly. Mimi had arrived and was gently making her way along the fence towards them both. Charlie's heart skipped a beat when she smiled at him. For a while they all sat and stared at the open shelter door. Charlie and Mimi had to over and over tell Toby that they would not jump down to sneak in the open door with him. They tried very hard to convince Toby it was too unsafe to try. But he had a curiosity streak a mile long, and tonight was no exception. In an effort to change the subject, Mimi suggested they go to the grassy field and chase the mice. All 3 cats spent the rest of the evening running and playing, climbing trees, chasing fireflies, and watching the stars in the sky. Charlie so much enjoyed times like these. He would always make sure both of his friends were safe as they played. As they walked through the grass, Charlie would always pick the safest paths. He would avoid streets with cars and yards with dogs as he led them on their nightly adventures. Charlie's crooked tail didn't matter to Toby or Mimi. In fact, when they were all 3 together, Charlie forgot all about it.